Have you ever had an experience where you're not sure if it was real or not? Like it's some kind of a dream that maybe was a dream, but maybe it actually happened? That was me. We had satellite television at home, and I was very little watching television shows that I vaguely recalled years later. And one of those shows is something I want to share with you. Because it's spooky month, and because I'm feeling like talking about it, let's talk about GENOCYBER. The 1993 hit anime TV show OVA that nobody has ever heard of. And before any of you go, actually, it's called GENOCYBER? Yes, I know, when I was editing this video, I realized that I have already put together everything, including syncing the video and the audio, while calling it GENOCYBER, so you're gonna hear GENOCYBER a lot, okay? Right, so GENOCYBER, it's a series of 5 OVA episode things that tell a single story in like 3 parts, and it's about a psychic death god abomination thing, whatever this is, that destroys the entire world. That's pretty much it. And we get there by introducing our main character, a girl called Elaine, and then ruining her life. That's GENOCYBER for you. This show actually did traumatize me. Like, I had nightmares about it, and I vividly recall like scenes of the show just making me extremely sad as a child. And I believe you can watch this show on YouTube for free somewhere, like if you really dig deep. But yeah, I've excluded a lot of the gore from this video just because I don't want this to get age restricted. Okay, so let's get to the actual show. The first movie in the trilogy takes place in Hong Kong, and is the only one I saw way back when. Right, so Elaine, a blonde mute girl with psychic powers, has escaped from some mean people who want her back. Before rewatching this anime, I somehow remembered Elaine eating trash and living in the slums, but that's not actually what happens. Elaine is one half of something called a Vajra, along with her sister Diana. What is a Vajra? I don't know, anime bullshit. But we'll get an actual explanation of it in the second part. Elaine escaped from the Kuryu Science Institute, which is headed by a guy named Kenneth Reed. Good old Ken is kind of a crazy sociopath who did bad stuff to Elaine's real father, Dr. Win Morgan, and ran away with her dad's funding to do his own thing. That thing being researching crazy psychic shit while dressed like some kind of a cyberpunk pimp. He also convinced Elaine's sister Diana that he was her actual father. He also abuses Diana because he's a dickhead. Diana is another important character in the story, and she's basically just a head as she was born with physical deformities. The rest of her is a mechanical prosthesis. And she also has psychic powers just like her sister, except not quite as strong. Diana is kind of nutty and unstable, being very jealous of Elaine, but both of them are required to complete this Vajra thing Dr. Dipshit is obsessed with. Okay, so let's backtrack. Elaine escaped from the Institute because she knows Kenny isn't her real father, and now she's hanging out with this kid called Rat who she met by accident. Rat is just some homeless loser nobody, probably an orphan, but Elaine and Rat get along really well. They go on adventures, play, and do other normal people things. Rat even buys clothing for Elaine and food. No idea how he got the money for either of those things, but whatever. And since this is GENOCYBER, one or both of them are going to be subjected to horrible things. And the opening logo is so chill too. Meanwhile, Davey, a hard-boiled Hong Kong detective, is investigating the Institute for various evil things Kenneth is allegedly responsible for, and these 3 totally normal, charming people are having lunch. Just kidding, they're actually terrifying cyborg abominations that were sent by the Kuryu's group chairman to retrieve Kenneth's research, because Ken has been tugging his leash a little too much. Speaking of Dr. Mustache, he sends Diana to retrieve Elaine so that he can use both of them to create his Vajra, whatever the fuck it is. And here's where things come tumbling down. Rat's former associates learn about Elaine and try to assay her, which looks like something straight out of an NTR doujin. It made me genuinely uncomfortable. Diana comes in like a wrecking ball, Elaine teleports herself and Rat to relative safety, and then immediately gets ambushed by the cyborgs. She is able to take out one of the cyborgs with a mental projection, but the other 2 take Rat and run away. That detective, Davey, finds Elaine and takes her to the hospital. And here we find out that Kenneth has a group of psycho LARPers on his payroll who go around dismembering people into bloody chunks. This is also probably the scene that terrified me the most as a child. Old Davey wakes up to find that someone was drunk or high or both when they played Operation on his body. The scene is burned into my retinas. It's brutal. I can't unsee it. Diana confronts Elaine again, gets absolutely wrecked, and the cyborgs show up holding Rat hostage. Elaine gets mortally wounded by Diana and then does a weird forced ghost move where she relocates her entire body into Diana. Yeah, I don't know. The cyborgs are very confused, and so am I. clean up the extras, collect Diana, Kenny, and load them up into a truck. This is where Diana and Elaine finally merge, creating GENOCYBER. GENOCYBER looks kind of like Diana's battlesuit, something I didn't notice until rewatching the footage for this video. There's also a pretty cool cyborg transformation sequence here that I probably can't show on YouTube in full, and we get a battle between the two cyborgs and GENOCYBER. At one point, GENOCYBER smashes a cyborg through an airplane, and it's pretty sweet, except there are people on the plane. GENOCYBER wins, of course, but things are still kind of bad for everybody else. Rad is unalive, has a Force Ghost moment of his own where he calls Elaine Big Sister, and so Elaine decides to casually wipe out Hong Kong. The end. Just kidding, there are two more parts. This scene in particular hit me pretty hard as a child, and for whatever reason I thought it happened earlier in the movie, but I think I confused it with a rooftop scene that was a different rooftop scene. I'm gonna be honest, I was never comfortable with gore. I'm still not, so rewatching this stuff made me kind of queasy at some points despite being older and far more desensitized to cartoon violence. Maybe I'm just a pussy, I don't know. What I do know is that this show is kind of psychotic. Kind of like that tall dude that I went to high school with that would bring real pictures of dead mutilated bodies to English class and then ask people to look at them. And funny enough, part 2 is arguably even more gory. It's also a lot more straightforward in terms of plots. I think I first saw it when I was a teenager, but I don't exactly remember. So part 2 starts out kind of how part 1 ended. Elaine was able to revert into a human, but now she has a prosthetic body from the neck down, just like her sister Diana. This is never explained, but it's probably because Diana and Elaine merged together. But yeah, dunno. And of course, the very first scene is a bunch of children getting ventilated by a helicopter. Let's talk about the main plot of part 2, which has to do with the Kingdom of Khura'in. Khura'in is a desert nation that pulled out of the UN because they didn't like the formation of the UN Global Military Forces, which is something foreshadowed in the first part of the anime that I glossed over. The UN is forming a global military, some nations are unhappy, and now Khura'in is fighting its neighbors for some reason or another. And also, for another totally unrelated random reason, the desert region of Khura'in makes pretty much all technology useless. So the UN has to do an amphibious assault via an aircraft carrier. To complicate matters, GENOCYBER also happens to be active in Khura'in, and the UN thinks it might be some kind of Khura'in superweapon, so they ask the Kuryu group for help. Look at that sweet corporate logo, certified made for humans. The Kuryu group is a global weapons development conglomerate, which explains those cyborgs from part 1. And speaking of cyborgs, they were sent by this kid, who is the Kuryu chairman or CEO. His name is Genichiro Kuryu. Why he's a literal child? I have no idea. Okay, so Alexandria is sent out, which is a huge supercarrier, along with Sakomitsu and his pet project. Sakomitsu is a scientist who worked with Morgan and Kenny a long time ago, and now he wants to surpass Morgan by creating a perfect Vajra warrior. He hopes to achieve this with the Vajranoid, a Vajra designed to replace human pilots. God, I really hate saying Vajra. Unlike GENOCYBER, the Vajranoid is contained within a mechanical pressure suit and cannot survive outside of it. We also get an explanation of what a Vajra is. It's described as a life force that blows through a mind shadow, which is its own universe, where the mandala channels the mind shadow and amplifies the Vajra to infinity. So yeah, don't think about it too hard. The Vajranoid is taken aboard the Alexandria, and it's somehow able to activate remotely. And we get our first glimpse of the dumb evil ghost kids that show up a lot throughout this part. I guess they are a psychic projection brought up by the Vajranoid, and they cause a pilot to crash his plane. Later on, Sakomitsu demonstrates his Vajranoid's abilities, as it can interface directly with a fighter plane, making it far superior to any human pilot. Everything goes well until another plane carrying Elaine tries to do an emergency landing on the Alexandria. The Vajranoid senses a danger in the lane and tries attacking the plane, but get this, flying really close to it. Sakomitsu is super mad, humiliated, and he really doesn't like that the Vajranoid acted irrationally, asking it questions. And then he starts getting disturbing visions. Elaine gets taken under the wing of Mira, a doctor on the ship, who she telepathically communicates with. I thought Elaine looked younger here than in part 1, but I think it's the mechanical body that was throwing me off. Speaking of that, some sailors make some very inappropriate comments about Elaine, but we do find out that cyborg bodies are not all that uncommon apparently, despite only Diana and the murder bots from part 1 having any kind of cyber augmentations. Anyway, Elaine reminds Mira of her daughter Laura, who tragically lost her life in an airplane crash. Can you guess what caused the airplane crash? I'll give you a hint. Rewind the video. Also, the evil ghost kids are back. They lead Elaine to the Vajranoid while the ship's captain wants to inspect whatever the hell Sakumitsu was working on. Elaine then transforms into GENOCYBER and fights the Vajranoid. Metal Man puts up a good fight, going as far as to infect GENOCYBER's arm, and he can also teleport, but still gets annihilated, and basically everyone is completely freaked out as like 3 people got turned into human paste. Sakumitsu gets blamed for the incident and spirals into insanity, theorizing that Elaine must be hiding something since she was the only person in the room to survive the Vajranoid encounter. GENOCYBER's infected arm finds its way to Sakumitsu, who studies it and convinces his other scientist buddies to make up for their past failures by killing literally everyone on the Alexandria. Maybe not in those words, but I don't know what they were expecting was going to happen. Also, evil ghost children are back. Sakumitsu lets the Vajranoid interface with the ship's reactor, and you can probably guess where this is headed, which is somewhat reminiscent of The Thing. A lot of the assimilation scenes aren't even animated, but everyone has a bad time regardless. Elaine is able to save Mira, who then confronts Sakumitsu, who at this point isn't even human anymore, and babbles incoherently. More body horror follows, and GENOCYBER finally destroys the Vajranoid. Mira is rescued by a Korean military chopper, but has totally lost her marbles after everything she's witnessed, including seeing a telepathic vision of how the real Laura lost her life and who Elaine really is. Oh, and GENOCYBER, sort of casually genocides Korean for funsies. The ending song is kind of bopping though, take a listen. I don't have too much to say about Part 2 specifically, other than I originally saw it much later, and it's still just as gory as I remember. And that brings us to the final part of the GENOCYBER trilogy. Humanity has been fighting GENOCYBER for 100 years, and they're getting their asses kicked. They're losing. Genichiro Kuryu, that kid CEO from Part 2, is now an old-ass man who really hates GENOCYBER. He vows that humanity will keep on fighting before GENOCYBER, murks him too. Then you get the sweet shot of the Death Star. It's not actually the Death Star, but we never get an explanation of what this thing really is, but it is likely the final middle finger to GENOCYBER from Genichiro. The year is now 2400, and we get introduced to our 2 new protagonists, Ryu and Mel. They are traveling performers and lovers who are visiting the city of Grand Arc in order to get enough money to cure Mel's blindness. Ryu is a knife thrower while Mel is able to read psychic impressions with latent ESP powers. A guard randomly harasses them for no reason whatsoever, which sort of sets the scene for the rest of this part. The city they're in is a dystopian, totalitarian shithole where the rich are propped up by an exploited working class. The mayor, Grimson Rockwell, is in charge, and the first time he shows up on screen, he executes one of his lackeys for not doing a good enough job, then appoints a new head of the public safety office, Radnak. What follows is a montage of the city's police department basically capturing, torturing, and executing dissidents. We also get a glimpse of an underground cult that seemingly worships GENOCYBER and preaches a message of peace and equality. I sure hope nothing bad happens to all these nice cultist people. Ryu made a promise to cure Mel's blindness, but they still don't have enough money. Mel doesn't like the city though, so they agree to leave and find their fortunes elsewhere. Before they leave, Ryu gets recruited by a very trustworthy looking gentleman with promises of a big payout. It was all a prank though, and Ryu's framed for murder, which he kind of did do. So Ryu runs away to Mel, telling her that they need to flee the city. Meanwhile, the mayor tells his security guy that the hippies underground are not miserable enough and thus need to be wiped out. The security guy, Radnak, tells the mayor that they're pretty harmless and even take care of the poorest children in the city. But as it happens to be, Mayor Rockwell hates poor people and children, so they all have to live together in a landfill. We cut back to Mel and Ryu, who escape underground to find the ruins of the old city. The security guy finds out about this and he's all like, who gives a shit, let him go. No one survives down there. No one except the GENOCYBER cultists, I guess. Anyway, Mel and Ryu wander around and fall into a chamber with the remains of GENOCYBER, preserved by the cultists. It turns out that after 100 years, or however long it's been, GENOCYBER got tired of unaliving people, with Diana convincing Elaine to leave to some other place. There's also this cool shot of whatever this is supposed to be. A flying city fortress, I guess? So humanity, or what was left of it, managed to defeat GENOCYBER, kind of. It all reminds me of MD Guy's Death Force, which was directed by the same person, I believe. Anyway, Diana makes contact with Mel, while Ryu stumbles back to the surface in a haze under Diana's influence. Mel has a strange dream with Diana acting as her companion, and when Mel wakes up, she is welcomed by the GENOCYBER cultists. We get some scenes of Mel living with the cult, and for what it is worth, the cultists are actively trying to make the world a better place and not repeat the mistakes of the past. They believe Mel is the messenger of God because she is able to communicate with GENOCYBER. While all of that nice stuff is happening, Ryu makes it to the surface and falls for another epic prank, getting arrested by the police, beaten, injected with some funny mindbreaker toxins, and then declared brain dead. But just to clarify, once Ryu makes it to the surface, he actually gets framed again, this time by one of the terrorists who are assaulting the city during this part, who slips him a bomb detonator before said terrorist is executed. And the very trustworthy dude from before convinces the police that the rebels are actually the GENOCYBER cult. This is where we enter the final act of the show. Plot twist: Mel is pregnant with Ryu's child, something she has been hiding from him, and she doesn't want to be the cult's messiah. But no time for all that, as the police swoop down into the slums, like the mass production Avas in End of Evangelion. Radneck, despite expressing no real desire to harm the slum dwellers prior, executes everyone without a hint of remorse. The priest shields Mel, finally seeing Diana for the first and last time, but the police have a lot more bullets than there are poor people. There are no survivors. Mel, who is now dead in the real world, becomes a part of the GENOCYBER's consciousness. She basically says that she wants to destroy the city, and then awakens GENOCYBER's second, larger, and possibly more powerful form. The city's police tries to fight back, but it's no use. Mel and the GENOCYBER rescue Ryu and destroy the city, but then Diana and Elaine force Mel out of the GENOCYBER, literally ejecting her revived, like actually alive body. GENOCYBER reverts back to its original form and then flies to the Kuryu space station, where it seemingly self-destructs, ending everything. The final scene is of Ryu and Mel safely on the ground in the ruins of the city of Grand Arc, with children crying inside the remnants of GENOCYBER. Mel ends up raising two girls, or at least I think they're girls, who may or may not be Elaine and Diana, reincarnated into a world without the Kuryu Corp or GENOCYBER. And that's it, the full story of GENOCYBER. So, what did I think about it? It's pretty good. One thing I didn't mention is that it's actually based on a manga with only like a single volume before it was cancelled, and interestingly enough, in that manga, Diana has black hair just like one of Mel's kids. A coincidence? I don't know. I've seen like one or two other GENOCYBER videos, and like, Mel and Ryu are not the only people left in the world. That's silly. They literally came to the city in a freaking train, and Ryu talks about like his hometown being smaller than the city. So like, they're not the only people left, okay? There are details about the show that I didn't notice when I first saw it. For example, Genichiro Kuryu, the kid CEO from Part 2 who sent those cyborgs, is not the one who appointed Kenneth Reed to the Institute in Part 1. That was Daijiro Kuryu, somebody you don't see but is mentioned by name. So I'm guessing what happened is that when Genichiro took over, he probably said like, hey, I don't trust this Reed guy, so I'm gonna send these cyborgs to collect him or whatever. And one thing I didn't really like about the show is how little character development there was. There wasn't enough time for it, obviously, because it's a short like OVA, but still, I would have preferred a little bit more. You know, speaking of the whole characterization thing, one thing I noticed is that Diana is introduced wearing lipstick, and as a child, I thought she was actually the older sibling, like by a few years at least, and as an adult. But she's not. She's actually the same age as Elaine, and they're both children. Diana's just trying to look more mature because she is jealous of her sister. That's essentially it, which is a kind of a neat little detail. Okay, so theory time. What is the GENOCYBER really? That's one of the questions I had as a child, and based on what I've seen as an adult, I think it's some kind of a creature or an entity that resides in another world and is summoned to our world through Diana and Elaine. If you look at the Vajranoid, it actually needed a pressure suit to survive, and something that happens earlier in the anime in the first episode is that whenever Elaine bonds with Diana for the first time, Diana's battle suit, the mecha suit that she wears, and also looks like GENOCYBER, gets sort of transported elsewhere, disappears. So I think that it was actually used to create GENOCYBER, and that's kind of the pressure suit it uses when it enters our world. But I've done way too much talking and recording, and I want to get a drink, so that's all I have for now. Did you enjoy the video? Yes? No? Maybe you have your own experience with an anime that gave you nightmares. Leave all that stuff in the comments, as I do enjoy reading them, and they make the whole thing worthwhile, honestly. But for now, see you in the next one. Bye.